now. Hello, everybody. Okay, so sorry, I just had to make this video really quick. Uh, so one of my friends online, he made a video about Pascal. Well, I mean, he made a video about stupid arguments that Christians make, and I tended to agree with most of them. One of them, though, he was talking about Pascal's wager, and so um, I was like, commented and I said, I think maybe you're oversimplifying the wager itself a little bit. And he said, okay, cool. Why don't you make a video regarding Pascal's wager? And I'm not doing that right now. Actually, in my research, because I was just reading his Pensis, which is I don't know how you pronounce that in the French, but I don't speak French. But he was talking about the Pensis is the book that where he outlines what the wager is. And so I'm reading this book and I get like 10 paragraphs in, right? And a little bit of background information. The Pensis is actually and Pascal lived like 30 to he lived to be 34, and then in the last 6 months of his life he contracted some sort of disease where he knew he was dying. And so while he was dying, he started writing this book, which is the Pensis, which Pensis means thoughts. And so what he was doing was he was writing down all of his final thoughts in this world. And uh, so you get a bunch of these little sort of choppy sections. It is basically like a book outline because he did have one theme that he was trying to connect and write this book about, but he didn't actually get to connecting all the themes. So one of our jobs as intellectuals nowadays is actually figure out what that theme was. If we care for Pascal, and I don't know why you wouldn't. He was one of the more forgotten philosophers of history, besides his wager, but he was actually a really smart guy. I mean, people who have done research into his life and the works that he's produced have said things like he was. If he had lived to be as old as Aristotle was, for instance, he probably would have been as influential or more influential than Aristotle. And that puts him like right up there with Newton and all those guys, the crazy, crazy smart people. But anyway, regardless of that, I'm reading this book, Pensis, and I just the first 10 paragraphs. It's his first thought. It's regarding the mathematical versus the intuitive mind, and if you haven't read it, just a basic overview is the mathematical mind is basically the mind where they come, they find truth by following following premises to their conclusions. Like just deducing things, and that makes sense. What he says. I'm paraphrasing, but he says that the mathematical mind reasons well. So like basically, this makes sense. The mathematical mind knows what makes sense. And that's what the mathematical mind is. It can follow really deep. No, no, no. Sorry. It's well, there are two types of mathematical mind actually. I forgot what the other type was called, but basically, the mathematical side of things, and for more modern language, mathematical mind just basically just means like the logician's mind or the logical mind. Um, and you could even say the scientific mind because the mathematical and the intuitive mind there is parallel to many sort of dichotomies when it comes to truth and understanding. So there's a scientific mind and the spiritual mind. You could say that that's one dichotomy that sort of follows the same patterns of reasoning. Another one would be the logical mind and the more logos and pathos, for instance. And then pathos and ethos would probably be more related than ethos and logos, in my view or in my estimation. Though I admit that ethos is it itself a thing, but it's still more related to pathos because when you're listening to an ethos argument, you're very much feeling it out with the more emotional side of you. So the other dichotomy would be logos and pathos, and these follow the same sort of guidelines. So those are two examples of other words, not exactly parallel. What's a different word that I could use? Not exactly analogous, but they're parallel to a degree. So anyway, the mathematical mind is follows follows logical reasoning, and it can follow a premise to its conclusion. The intuitive mind, it's something that is more like this doesn't feel right, or this does feel right. And the way he described it in the book is he says the intuitive mind can see the the truths in the world, and there's these more fine, minute, situation-based truths that are infinite in the world. They're everywhere, but um, and they're all really just they're all how would you say it? They're all very consequential. So you have an infinite number of these truths, and they're like incredibly consequential, and that's why they're more intuitive. Is because you can't really find the premise for every single one of these and then follow them to their conclusions, because they're so consequential that you have to just react to them right away. You have to say, okay, there. How do I do this? And you have to respond in an instant, and that's why you use your intuition to react to them and to find those sorts of truths. Meanwhile, the mathematical mind, it understands truths that are a little bit more removed from our everyday experience, and this is what he says. They're a bit more removed from our everyday experience. So, uh, so the intuitive mind, that's a bit more. Um, it understands more how to react to things like right away. It doesn't have the patience to look into these mathematical principles, and that's why there's a bit of a there. That's why there is a dichotomy, because he says that if the mathematical mind would be able to see the infinite number of truths and principles that are in the world that you have to feel out and you can't really find the premises for and then follow them, then it would do this really well because it reasons well, because the mathematical mind reasons well. So uh, the problem is it's just they're too numerous and they don't always have clear premises. On the other hand, the intuitive mind just it can see well, and seeing and reasoning they're sort of similar, but they're not exactly the same. Uh, that's because one is felt more than it is thought. Well, darn, I don't know. Uh, oh, you can probably go back or something. I don't know. Anyway, Michael, don't worry. I'm just refreshing and explaining what the differences between the mathematical and the intuitive mind are at this point. So, anyway, where was I? I get distracted easily. The mathematical mind, intuitive mind. Yeah, I'm sure I don't have to continue explaining. You guys probably understand what I've said so far, and you can get the basic principles. Well, the mathematical mind is finds truths that are much more removed from our everyday experience, but they always follow logical conclusions, while the intuitive mind follows um, principles that are very much here and now, that like they have to do with our everyday experiences, um, but they don't always have premises that you can follow to get to them. And so those are the two types. And the ideal would be to have both of those at the same time in a person. But people always tend towards one or the other. And of course, I'm just rephrasing what Pascal said. and we can sort of dissect these principles or these theories or hypotheses um, later, which I intend to do a little bit, but the idea is there. And this is how I sort of view it. So, so the mathematical mind follows these premises. It operates on the basis of maxims and first principles, and it says this is um, it sets boundaries. You could say it sets boundaries. This is where we find truth. And like if you think about a fence, that's a circle. This is where truth is. And then it can, if the premises are the circle, then then it can't really travel far because it can only go as far as they can see from the premises. And this is an analogy. While the intuitive mind, that's something that more goes deeper into the circle. And even if the premises don't immediately or if the principles don't immediately follow from the premises, it can still see what these premises are and reach them. And so one this is something, it's sort of, I might be biased, I might be explaining it in a biased way because I came to this understanding a while ago. I was talking to one of my friends, and I was discussing with this Bible study group that I lead. I said, the question came up, you know, is it, it was regarding Calvinism. It said, the question was, can a good God create people in order to send them to hell and torture them for eternity? And that's a tough one to answer. I mean, obviously, if you're a non-believer, then it's not really that tough. You just say no, and that's why God doesn't exist. But as a believer, that is a tough one because there are these sorts of like, if God, the problem of free will, and I'm sure anyone who's listening to this will actually, I mean, if you clicked on a video that said analyzing Pascal, you probably know what the dilemma of free will is. So I won't go into it, but you get the idea. And so this is something that I was thinking about for a long time, and it's something I've been thinking about for a really long time as well. And I asked them, does it feel right? Like, and before you're like, that's not how you find, that's not how you reason well. Like, does it feel right? That's not how you come up with answers, and that's true. But on the other hand, what I was asking them was just listen before you start criticizing, because I have my reasons for saying what I said. I asked every person in the group. First, I said it bluntly. I said, "Okay, God, a good God, created people in order to send them to hell and torture them forever. Does that feel right?" I think every person I asked said, "No, that doesn't feel right at all. It feels unjust." And yeah, I feel like that's how I feel as well. One person was a bit more, um, uh, they had a bit more of a stronghold where they said, "Well, God, it has the authority to do it, and He has the right to do it." So yeah, and so I kept pressing. I said, Are you sure that feels right?" Like, you just look at that and you're like, "Mm-hmm, that's justice right there. That's exactly how you feel." And then after a while, like 5 minutes back and forth, of them saying yeah, and me just repeating the same question, they said, "Okay, yeah, no, it doesn't really feel right, but God is God, so I have to give Him that right, like it's His." And what I was getting at, and it was of course not very refined at that time because I had just thought about it, but the idea was that why would God put in to all humanity, like, it's universal. I've never asked anyone that question and got the opposite answer, that no, it doesn't, or yeah, it does feel right. I've never got that answer except for that one time, and then eventually they said no, actually it doesn't feel right. So that it's universal to all humans that doesn't seem right. So why would God, if that is the case that he does do that, then why would God put it in us to believe that that's wrong? Like, can can anyone follow that? What I'm saying, it just doesn't seem right. And so that's sort of an example. It's something that that you it. Let me take a step back. When you're looking for truth in this sort of way, of course um, you can't really come to conclusions on the basis of feelings, but I think the feelings can actually guide the logic. I did another video a while ago. It said talking about the same issue, and then someone posted another video and said, basically criticizing what my answer was, because my answer was uh, solely on the basis of logic. Can a good God send people to hell for eternity? And I was like, my conclusion was yeah. But I was also talking to this other guy about morality, and they said if God is the arbiter of morals, and I mean that technically, like if morals are arbitrary on the basis of what God had decided for all eternity, then he could have made it good for people to be tortured forever. And that is one of those things that got me thinking, like, yeah, that doesn't seem right. Um, and then this person was really good at pressing me about this. And going back to Pascal, I said earlier that the mathematical mind creates like a fence, right? And then the intuitive mind explores all the inside of that fence. What you have is sort of a what do you call that? A symbiotic relationship. The mathematical mind sets the boundaries, and the intuitive mind explores everything that's within those boundaries. And the feeling about God is one of those examples of what can be done, because the intuitive mind, regarding this question, still has to follow what we know logically about God. That one, he is good. Two, he loves people, and three, he seems to cause bad things to happen to people. And so the logical mind, of course, has absolutely no problem with this. Like, okay, all you have to do is define things in such a way where that's okay and necessary, essentially. But the intuitive mind doesn't feel that that's right. So those are all the boundaries that the logical mind sets. Like, good, loves people, and causes bad things to happen. How do we get those all to connect? Well, that's the field of the logical mind. However, the intuitive mind sort of is a guide for that. So the logical mind sets the boundaries, and then the intuitive mind guides us to the truth within those boundaries, in a way. And that's sort of what my musings have been regarding this issue with Pascal. Is he didn't really talk, and I've deviated from what he actually said and then what I'm saying. So you have to uh, take some of that with a grain of salt. But the and for the other guy who's listening, I haven't actually got to the wager yet. I've only got past the first 10 paragraphs. So be patient. I'll get there eventually. What I've come to conclude on regarding this, and I'm still hashing things out in my brain, is that if it's true that these two types of minds exist, and these are the basic the basic structures of the intellect, or of the types of intellect, then if on the one hand you have too much logic, then you get uh, sort of the tyranny of what that other person said. Like, God can be completely arbitrary, and it doesn't even matter because we've defined things in such a way as that's good. So, but on the other, and that's too much logic, you could say, or it's purely logic and it's not enough intuition. But then on the other hand, if you have purely intuition, if you don't have the boundaries that the logic sets, then you have you come up with like all kinds of crazy ideas because it's not true. Uh, let's see. What would be an example of that regarding what I've been talking about? Well, you could say that God just doesn't judge because it's not nice to judge. Okay, sometimes that seems to feel right, but we know that God does judge, and He judges righteously. So you can't just say that. You have to follow some sort of first principles, and that's why I've been thinking about this. Is you have these two. They create this symbiotic relationship. You have the one that sets the fence and the one that explores the fence, and you could say like a bit of their. Okay, I'll end on this. It's like this. Here's the fence. This is the fence that the logician sets. There are many truths, almost an infinite amount of truths in that fence, but there are also almost an infinite amount of untruths in that fence. And the person can almost arbitrarily choose which ones are true and which ones are not true. And that doesn't always, you don't always come to the right conclusions there. Like sometimes you pick ones that are false and sometimes you pick ones that are right. And that's what the logician does. What the intuitive mind does is it helps to separate between the good and the bad inside that fence. And so, regarding the justice dilemma that I was discussing, there are many false conclusions that you can draw from what the Bible does say regarding God and justice. And there are many proper conclusions that you can draw. But you need both the intuitive mind and the logical mind in order to come to those proper conclusions. And I think that's the gist of what Pascal was saying, plus a little bit of expansion on it from myself. And a really good tip, or a good trick, is if it's pretty much a human universal that one thing doesn't feel right, is probably a bad conclusion from proper logical reasoning. Like the God creates people in order to send them to hell and torture them for eternity. It's like it's pretty much a human universal that doesn't sound right. That doesn't feel right. Even among supportive Christians who are more inclined to accept that answer. So that's something that you maybe don't throw it out, but accept a better explanation that feels more proper or feels more right to the intuitive mind, if it's equally explanatory. But yeah, anyway, I've been going on way too long. I don't know if this helps, like anyone, for anything. I just sort of was thinking about this and I was like, I have to tell somebody. And so I told my friend, and then I was like, I'm gonna make a video about this. And so that's what this is for. What exactly is outside of the fence? 1 second, let me see how much time I have. Okay, I have 7%. Maybe I can answer that. What is outside of the fence? So outside of the fence would be everything that's not logically possible. because again, the fence is what the logician sets. It says the logician goes and defines what everything inside of the fence which is logically possible. So outside of the fence is the infinite number of possibilities that are not possible according to proper reasoning. So, okay, that answers your question. Cool, cool. And so, yeah, and then of course the intuitive mind explores what is inside the realm of possibility and deciphers what is a better explanation versus what is uh, a worse explanation. It looks like my time is up. My phone's about to die. So, yeah. See you guys later.